welcome or welcome back to my channel. Today I thought it would be fun to do my top 24 books of 2024, as well as a couple books that were just maybe a little bit of a disappointment or letdown that just were my least favorite of the year. Now with that said, doesn't mean that they're bad books. I either had too high of expectations for them or they're just not books for me, and that's okay. My opinion doesn't really matter all that much in the grand scheme of things, but I just thought this would be a fun video to do. As of today, I have read 117 books this year, and I will by the end of the year get that number to 118 because I'm determined to finish every book that I'm currently in the middle of before going into the new year, so that in January I can start with 0 books, clean slate, and I'm only in the middle of one more book. So I'm determined to finish it by the end of the year. Let's just get into it, I guess. So I am gonna start from my least favorite of the 24 of my top favorites all the way up to my favorite of the year. This was really hard to do, guys. So many of these books I adore and love, and it is really hard and challenging to pick your top 24. Now because it's my top 24, the ratings for them all range from starting at the bottom to like 4.5 star ratings, all the way up to like my 5-6 star ratings. So I am super excited, and let's just get into it. So starting with book number 24 of the year, we are at, some of these I don't own because I read them on my Kindle or listened to them on Libby. So if they're not, I don't have a physical copy, that's why, especially for the books that are my disappointments of the year. I think I only have one book that was a disappointment. It's because it's in the middle of a series. All the other ones I either am getting rid of because I didn't like it, or I just read it on Kindle or Libby and don't own them. But anyway, starting with book number 24 is The Locked Door by Freida McFadden. This was my first ever Freida McFadden book that I read, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really fun, and I didn't see any of the plot twist comings. It was a good starter point for Freida McFadden, I think, because it wasn't one of her majorly popular books, so I didn't go in already expecting it to be amazing because I've heard so many amazing things about it. I had never heard anyone talk about this one, so I think that was a good starting point for her books, and I really enjoyed it. Obviously not as much as some of the others, that's why it's number 24, but it's still number 24 out of 117, so still pretty good. Number 23 is Bride by Ali Hazelwood. I have a love-hate relationship with Ali Hazelwood. Some of her books I really enjoy, and then others aren't really for me. I did really enjoy Bride, and I know a lot of people don't necessarily enjoy Bride, but I love a good fantasy book, so I really enjoyed it, and it's one of my favorite Ali Hazelwood books. The next book that I'm going to talk about, number 22, is Bane by Alex Astor. I just finished this one earlier in the month, and I really enjoyed it. I liked this one a little bit more than I liked Lightlark, so that's why I'm not including Lightlark. I really enjoyed getting to see what happened with Isla before the Centennial Games, and getting to see her grow into her power and become this like powerful badass person. So I really enjoyed that part about it. The ending I was not expecting. It was a major plot twist, and I'm super excited to go into the next one. So that was book number 22. Next we have 2 in 1. There's a couple of these that are like series that I'm just clumping together because otherwise I would have had 5 different books from Throne of Glass on this list, and I just didn't want to do that. So the next ones are The Apprentice and Assistant to the Villain. I really enjoyed this little duology right now. I know there's going to be more coming out, but I really enjoyed these. I think they are so much fun, and there's banter, and I had a blast while listening to these. They are fun. I was laughing, and I really think they are a great fantasy book for if you are wanting something not super high stakes, but still not quite the cozy fantasy. Like, there's still stuff happening in them to where it's keeping you on the edge of your seat and you want to know what happens next. And it's not like there's nothing, because cozy fantasy is very cozy fantasy. There's not any high stakes at all. So this has a little bit of stakes to it, but still very in that cozy fantasy realm, because it's not as high stakes as, say, like Throne of Glass or something. So I loved these two books, and I am super excited and cannot wait for the next one to come out. 20 is the Daughter of No World series. I have read the first two. I still need to read the third one. I think it's a trilogy. I am really enjoying this series. I think it's a lot of fun, and if you like Throne of Glass, I think you'll really enjoy this series as well. Number 19 is A Novel Love Story by Ashley Poston, I think is her name. I really enjoyed this one. I thought it was really fun, and the concept was different and something that I've never read before. And I had a blast while reading it. I know a lot of people had like mixed reviews on it. Some people loved it, some people did not enjoy it, but I really liked it. I thought it was fun, different. It was my first book by this author, and I'm excited to read some more books by her. And I just loved the concept. I would love to get thrown into my favorite books and get to meet all my favorite characters. So I had a blast while reading that one. Number 18 is a cozy fantasy. It is Welcome to the Fay Cafe. I read this on my Kindle, and I thought it was really fun. It was my introduction into cozy fantasy. It was the first cozy fantasy book that I read in this year and in general. And I really loved it. I thought it was really fun, and the concept was a little bit different. You had the main character who was opening up a coffee shop, and she accidentally killed a fae. And so the prince of the fae comes to kill her for revenge, I guess, kind of. But then they end up falling in love with each other, and him and his little group of fae friends all come, and they end up having to work at the coffee shop that the main character is opening. And I just thought it was really fun and different. And I do have the next one downloaded on my Kindle, but I haven't read it yet. I'm waiting until fall time comes back around, I think. But I really enjoyed it, and it was my introduction to cozy fantasy, and I love cozy fantasy now, so very happy about that one. Number 17 is The Bodyguard by Catherine Center. This was my first Catherine Center book, and I actually have not read another one by her yet, but I do have a couple that I want to read from her. But I really enjoyed this one. I thought it was really fun, and the fake dating between the bodyguard and the A-list actor was so fun, and their banter back and forth, I just loved it. And I thought they were a great couple. So that's all I'm saying for that one. Number 16 is Maybe in Another Life by Taylor Jenkins Reid. You will notice there's a couple books by this author on this list. I love Taylor Jenkins Reid. She is one of my favorite authors, and this book definitely did not disappoint. I thought this one was really fun, and the concept was really cool. You are following the main character, and a point comes where she has to choose between two different paths, and then the book splits and follows each path and what would have happened depending on which path she chose. And I really enjoyed that, and getting to see how her life would have played out both ways, I thought was really fun. So highly recommend this one. Number 15 is Divine Rivals. I'm actually in the middle of Ruthless Vows right now. That is my one book that I'm still in the middle of that I'm going to finish by the end of the year. But I really enjoyed Divine Rivals. I thought it was really fun. I love a historical fiction book. So having a historical fantasy book is right up my alley, because I love fantasy and I love historical fiction. And this one is just that. It is set in wartime. So it follows two different characters who are becoming war correspondents, and their job is to write about the war that is happening between two gods. And so there's magic, there's mythology. It was everything that I love in one book. Book number 14, we have another cozy fantasy, and that is Legends and Lattes. I did just end up getting the special editions of Legend and Lattes and Bookshop and Bone Dust, which I have not read the second one yet, But I did get these special editions yesterday because I had a Barnes & Noble gift card from Christmas. So I just wanted to include it because it is gorgeous. But I also, of course, have the OG normal cover. I really enjoyed this book. It was another cozy fantasy. My second cozy fantasy, I think, or third, something like that. But I loved this one. It follows an orc as she opens up a coffee shop. What's up with these cozy fantasies and coffee shops? I don't know, but I'm going to eat it up every time because I love it. And she opens up a coffee shop in a place where not a single person knows the word coffee or knows what it is. So I just thought that that concept was really fun and different because I'm personally not a coffee fan. I'm a tea person, but I thought it was really fun seeing how she goes about opening up a coffee shop in a place where no one knows what coffee is. So fun. I loved this one. Number 13, we've got another Taylor Jenkins Reid book, and that is One True Loves. I thought this book was really good too, and the story of this one, it follows a girl who, on her 1-year wedding anniversary, her husband gets into either a plane crash or helicopter crash. I don't fully remember which one it is. A helicopter crash. Just saw it on the back. And he's presumed dead. And then like 3 or 4 years later, she is now engaged to someone else, and she gets a call from her husband that she thought was dead, and turns out he's not dead and he's coming back home. So she kind of has to navigate that whole situation and figure out who she belongs with. And I thought it was really interesting. It tore at my heartstrings, and I definitely had some emotions coming out while reading this book. Teared up a little bit. So I loved this one. Loved Taylor Jenkins Reid. Number 12 is This Summer Will Be Different by Carly Fortune. I really enjoyed this one. I read it in the summertime. Highly recommend reading it in the summertime. It follows Lucy, who every year goes to the same little town with her best friend because her best friend's family has a house out there. One year she ends up meeting the best friend's brother at a bar, and she doesn't know, and they end up hooking up and having a little one-night stand thing. Turns out next morning they find out that he is best friend's brother and she is the best friend's best friend, or the sister's best friend. And they vow to never let it happen again, but each year, each summer, they always come back to this house and they cannot keep their hands off of each other. Fun little summer romance. I enjoyed it. Book 11 was Funny Story. I really enjoyed this one. I love Emily Henry and her writing. Everything that she writes, I adore. But I did read all Emily Henry's backlist last year, so that's why there's not another one in this 24, because I already read them all. And I'm super excited for her next book to come out. But Funny Story, I just loved how it was 2 people that were kind of forced into a roommate situation because their exes get together, and so they're kind of forced to be roommates, and they don't necessarily know each other or anything, and then they're kind of forced to be bonded because of what they're going through with their exes, and their friendship that turns into a romance is just top tier, and I loved the male main character in this book. Number 10, we're now in my top 10 favorite books of the year. Number 10 is The Boyfriend by Frida McFadden. I think this is my favorite Frida McFadden book that I have read so far. I thought it was really fun, and I did not see the plot twist coming. I thought for sure I knew who did it, and when it came out who actually did it, my jaw was on the floor because I was not expecting it at all. So I definitely enjoyed this one. It was my favorite Frida McFadden book I have read to date, and that's why it's in my top 10. Number 9 is A Man Called Ove. I adored this book. I saw the movie with Tom Hanks when it first came out, and I still was sobbing at this book, even though I knew exactly what happened and knew exactly how it ended. I was sitting on the couch after reading this sobbing, and there were multiple points in this book that made me cry. It I'm normally not one to actually underline things in books, but I definitely have a couple spots in here of things that I have underlined. So I'll read you some of them, I guess, because why not? People said Obe saw the world in black and white, but she was color, all the color he had. I love that one. And when she giggled, she sounded the way Obe imagined champagne bubbles would have sounded if they were capable of laughter. I love the way that Frederick Bachman writes, and this was my first Frederick Bachman book, and I already have 2 or 3 more that I have on my physical TBR that I need to read because I just love the way that he writes, and I'm so excited to read more of him in 2025. Number 8, we've got the Dance of Thieves duology. I loved this duology. The found family that happens by the end is just, I love a found family. If you put found family in the books, I'm going to eat it up and read it every single time. I love that found family so much. And this duology has amazing found family. It's fantasy without any of the crazy spice because I personally am not the biggest fan of spice. I will skip over it in books, but I loved that this one had everything that the high stakes fantasy has that I love without the crazy spice, but you still get the romance. Now, I will say Dance of Thieves was a little bit slower for me, but Vow of Thieves was intense from the very beginning, and I read this entire book in like 2 days, 3 days, something like that, because I was reading like 100 to 150 pages a day of this book. I could not put it down. So I love these books. I will recommend them to anyone and everyone. Number 7, we've got Powerless. I loved Powerless. I was laughing and giddy the entire time I was reading this one, and I did listen to this one, but I adored it. I love Peyton and Kai. They are so cute together. I am a huge fan of games and fantasy books, trials, whatever you want to call them, and this has that. And I just thought it was so fun, and seeing what happens when someone without powers is forced into a game where you rely on powers. So fun. Book number 6 is another Taylor Jenkins read, the last one in this video, but it is The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I adored this. Again, I had a Barnes & Noble gift card, so I got the special edition of this one. I do have the paperback back here as well, but I loved this book, and I love everything Taylor Jenkins Reid writes, and I thought it was really cool getting to see how everything was all connected and why Evelyn made sure that this one person was the one person that was going to tell her story, and seeing how it all unfolds. I just loved it. And to feel like I was in the room with the 2 characters while they were doing the whole interview and she was figuring out, she was telling her life story, was just everything that I wanted in a book like this, and I loved it. This copy is beautiful as well. Book number 5, we're in the top 5 now, is Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. I love this. Is my favorite Abby Jimenez book that I've read, which I've only read like 2 or 3 from her, but I adored this one. And there was one quote in this book that was everything to me, but I just love this book, and Justin is the epitome of if he wanted to, he would. And I just loved him as main character, or male main character, and just him and Emma together. But I also just loved that this book kind of just shows that love doesn't have to be big, huge, grand gestures, and it's the little things that matter. And you can see that throughout the whole book with the way Justin is. Like I said, he's the epitome of if he wanted to, he would. And it shows. But just within the quotes too, I was sobbing reading this book, which, hello, does not look like a book that you would sob to, but I did. And I do not regret that, and I love that I sobbed during this book because it was just that beautiful and that heartwarming. And I love that Abby Jimenez can take a little rom-com but add the emotion behind it, because that's what I like in a romance book. I don't like just the plain fluffy romance. I want something behind it, and she is perfect with having that fluffy rom-com but having depth and emotion in the books as well. Love this one. Excited for her new release next year too. Book number 4, we've got the Crescent City series. I only have the first 2 because I'm waiting for the third one to come out in paperback. But I loved this series. I know a lot of people have mixed reviews about the Crescent City books, but personally, I enjoyed it. I had a blast. I cried. I loved it. I am a Sarah J. Maas fan, so I loved that it was urban fantasy, which was a little bit different for me. I had never read, or I've read like a couple, maybe one other urban fantasy, but this one was the first like true real urban fantasy, I feel. And I loved that aspect about it because you got all the fun elements of fantasy books, but set in a completely different time period than you're used to seeing for fantasy. So I loved this series. It will always hold a place in my heart, just like all Sarah J. Maas books do. But every single one of these books were 5 stars. Doesn't happen too often in a series. Number 3, we have The Lovely War by Julie Berry. I really enjoyed this one. Like I said, I love a historical fiction book. And this one was, again, kind of like historical fantasy, like Divine Rivals, where it's about World War II, or World War I, sorry. It takes place in World War I, but it's told from the Greek god's point of view, and so you get to hear Aphrodite tell the story of her 2 greatest loves that she has done as the goddess of love. But you also get to hear from Ares, the god of war, and just how the 2 stories play out. I was crying while reading this book, and I really enjoyed this one. I think this book is going to be one of those books that sticks with me for a while, and I have already recommended it to people and will continue to recommend it to people because it was beautiful. If you can't tell, all of the books in the top like 5 are all books that had me feel something emotionally and crying. And book number 2 was no different than that, and that was The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. This is my first Kristen Hanna book and the only Kristen Hanna book that I've read so far. Like I just said, I love historical fiction, and specifically when it's set in World War II, because I've always been intrigued by World War II. It was always my favorite subject in history class in high school when we would get to the section of World War II and the Holocaust. I was always super intrigued, and I would love to go see Auschwitz and all that kind of stuff one day, and Frank House, all of it. But I loved this book. The emotion that it brought out, and the tale of 2 sisters. I'm going to start crying thinking about this book. Seeing how 2 sisters could be faced with such different things during the war, and how the paths they each take, and how everything unravels within the paths that they take and the choices that they make. Just, it's something that I think if you don't have a sister, you might never fully understand. But I have a twin sister. I have an identical twin sister, and we are pretty polar opposites of each other. And so I feel like if a war were to break out now, we would have 2 very different paths that we would choose to take. And it's just was really interesting seeing how it all played out, and the way that Kristen Hanna writes and keeps you entertained the whole time and intrigued in what comes next. Even for a historical fiction book where it's not like fantasy where it's super high stakes. I mean, it's about war, so it is high stakes, but World War II's from the past. You know what happened, you know how it ended, and you are still wanting to know what happened to these two characters and to root for them. And I loved this book. I am super excited to read some more of hers. I now have 3 other physical copies of Kristen Hanna books that are on my physical TBR that I'm hoping to get to in 2025. Because I think she will become one of my favorite authors of all time. We're at number 1 now, guys. We are at number 1, and number 1 actually consists of 8 books. Can you guess what it is by the shirt that I'm wearing and the fact that it's 8 books? And I think I mentioned it earlier in the video. I'm showing you the first and the last book in the series, but that is the Throne of Glass series. I love this series. It is my favorite Sarah J. Maas series that she has written, and I think it's safe to say it is my favorite series of all time, which is crazy because that spot belonged to Harry Potter for the longest time. But the way that this story is told and the characters you meet, the found family that you find at the end, and I adore this book. I think about this book and this book series every single day. I am constantly seeing videos on TikTok from this series, and every time I hear or see anything about certain different parts of this book, I will start getting teary-eyed. I love it. If I had to pick a favorite, it would probably be Kingdom of Ash. I cried the most I have ever cried in a book reading this book. And I did get close while I was reading A Man Called Ove and The Nighting Gale to crying as much as I cried in this book, but I still think this book made me cry the most I have ever cried. But I adore this series, and I don't ever see another series making me feel the way that these books made me feel while I was reading them. And I'm so sad that I'm never going to be able to read them for the first time again. And they had to be my number 1 spot. It had to be. So those are my top 24 books of 2024. Now let's talk about some books that maybe were a little bit of a disappointment or just not for me. Let's see, let me pull up the thing. The first one that I'm going to talk about is one that I actually still have a physical copy of. And it's funny because the first book in this series was in my 24 and 2024. But this one specifically just fell a little flat for me, and that is Reckless by Lauren Roberts. I really enjoyed Powerless. Like I said, it was in my top 24. But Reckless just felt like there was no point to it, and like nothing happened at all until the last 10 pages of the book. And it just put me into a little bit of a slump. I had the hardest time finishing this book because I was just not intrigued by what was happening, because it felt like there was no point to the plot of this book. And this book, I'm gonna say it, she could have just done a duology and made the books a little bit longer, and I think it would have been much better. So, but I'm still super excited for Fearless, and I already have it pre-ordered. I am gonna read it right when it comes out, but this one just fell a little flat for me. Another book that I read this year that was not my favorite was Again by E. Lockhart. I think I've just grown out of young adult romance when it's strictly romance books. I love a young adult fantasy book still, but I think I've just gotten to the point in my life. I'm 27 years old. A YA romance is just a little too cringy and too, I don't know. I'm sure there's some out there that I would still enjoy, but for the most part, when I tried to read a strictly YA romance, it's just not my favorite. And that's okay. That just is, my preference. something that you grow when as a reader the more you read. And yeah. Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter. I did not like this book. I'm just gonna say that. I thought it was too graphic, too much. I did not enjoy it. I am giving it 2 stars. Honestly, the only reason I'm giving it 2 stars and not 1 star is because I was still intrigued with what happened and who did what. But everything else about this book, it was just too graphic, too much. I definitely think that this book should have had some trigger warnings. And maybe it does. I listened to it on Libby, and the audiobook definitely does not have any trigger warnings at the front of it. But maybe the actual physical book of it would. But I definitely think this book needed trigger warnings, and it did not have any. And it was too much for me. I did not enjoy it. We're moving on. Another book that I did not enjoy too much, or was a little bit of a letdown, was Check and Mate by Ali Hazelwood. Like I said, I kind of have a love-hate relationship with Ali Hazelwood. Some books of hers I love, some books I don't like, and then there's a couple in the middle where I enjoy them, but they're not my favorite. Check and Mate, I did not really enjoy. I just thought maybe, it was just a strictly YA romance book. And I don't know how to play chess. I've never played chess, and I feel like this book focused very heavily on chess, which I know it's about chess players, but I definitely think that it could have been done in a way where it wasn't focused so much on like teaching us about chess, because I'm not a chess fan, but I loved The Queen's Gambit, and that's about chess, but you don't feel like you're being taught about chess. So I think that with the just strict YA romance just wasn't for me. That's okay. I have other Ali Hazelwood books that I love or that I enjoy. I'm not sure if she's going to be an author that I'm going to continue to read from though, because like I said earlier, I am not the biggest spice person. I prefer books with either closed door spice or books where you can skip over the spice and feel like it doesn't take away from the actual story or plot. And from what I've heard, her most recent book, Not in Love, is very spicy, almost to the erotica kind of spice, which puts me off of reading it. Also has a new release that's coming out in 2025. And I've also heard someone say that one is supposed to be her spiciest book, so it's going to be even spicier than Not in Love, which I've heard is kind of like erotica. So I don't think I'm going to be continuing reading any Ali Hazelwood books, but we shall see where that goes. Another book that I did not enjoy, which people might hate me for, but I did not enjoy Red Rising. I am not going to continue the series. It was not for me. I have enjoyed some sci-fi books in the past, so I don't think it's a matter of me just not enjoying sci-fi, but it was just, I don't know, I felt no connection to the characters in this book, and honestly, I was really confused for a big chunk of it, and I just don't think, I tried to get into the second one, like I started to listen to it, and I could not get into it, and I immediately put it down because I was just like, I can't do it. So I think I'm just gonna DNF that whole series. It's not for me, and that's okay. If you enjoy it, that's great for you, and I love that for you, but I just am not a fan. I think that was all of them. Yep. So there you have it. Those are my top 24 of 2024 with a couple that I did not enjoy. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video, and let me know if any of my favorites were also your favorites. And tell me like your top 1 or 2 favorite books of the year, because I would love to know. Maybe I can add them to my TBR for 2025 if I haven't read them already. I hope you guys have a great rest of your morning, evening, or night whenever you're watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye guys!